glad you're here. This is the audio version of the book Peak, A Resource for Recovery, authored by Faye Anam Avis. Chapter 6, The Pain of Loss. A person goes missing. Friends and family members have no idea where the person is or what has happened to them. Here's the question. Which is harder on the family? Hearing from the police that they have no further information, or hearing from the police that the family member has died? Missing persons and prolonged grief disorder. Researchers Steve Powell, Willie Bettolo, and Maria Hagel found that families with unconfirmed losses had higher levels of traumatic grief as well as severe depression. The study, published in the journal European Psychologist, found that the unconfirmed loss of a family member produces more distress compared with enduring a confirmed loss. The authors conclude that the particularly high levels of severe depression, including suicidal thinking, in this group was especially worrying. These are the symptoms of what is referred to as prolonged grief disorder. A parent's experience of estrangement from their adult children is similar to that of families where a member goes missing. A. Communication is cut off. B. Estranged parents are often uncertain what has happened. C. There are feelings of loss that triggers a grief process. D. It is uncertain whether the relationship will be restored. Broadly speaking, the components of grief are well understood at this point, and it is not difficult to track the grief of estrangement along that trajectory of a prolonged grief disorder. The first component of a prolonged grief disorder is shock. Shock is defined as a sudden, upsetting, or surprising event or experience. The great majority of parents give birth to and raise children thinking that the relationship will endure for their lifetimes. Certainly, every relationship has its ups and downs, but at that moment, when a parent first realizes that their child has cut off the relationship with them, perhaps forever, an emotional blow is delivered that has few parallels in life experience. Most estranged parents can probably describe that experience in detail, including when it happened, where they were, and what they were doing. The second component of a prolonged grief disorder is denial. Denial occurs when a person is faced with a fact that is too uncomfortable to accept and rejects it instead, insisting that it is not true in spite of overwhelming evidence. Denial in a prolonged grief disorder can be deepened by the fact that there is always hope for a reconnection. For estranged parents, denial can express itself in two ways. First, there is denial of cause. When adult children are asked if they have shared with their parents the reason for the estrangement, 67% said they had. In their response to the same question, 67% of estranged parents denied that they had. It is likely many parents are in denial about the estrangement from their adult children that keeps them from actually hearing those reasons. Then there is the denial of severity. Estranged parents tend to hold out hope for reconciliation when the evidence suggests that the break in the relationship is likely permanent. As noted in Chapter 2, surveys of estranged parents indicate that they tend to hold out hope for reconciliation, while surveys of their adult children indicate that they do not. Denial is not an indicator of a deficiency in estranged parents. It is a way of pacing the grief process so that parents do not have to deal with difficult emotions until they are ready. The next component is anger. The anger of a prolonged grief disorder can be intensified compared to that of a death because there is an element of rejection and estrangement not present when a person dies. The anger of an estranged parent might be expressed directly through face-to-face conversations, phone calls, letters, text messages, emails, or on social media. It might also be expressed indirectly to third parties in contact with the estranged child, friends, family members, church members, or work associates. Finally, anger might not be expressed at all. It can remain confined to the interior life of thoughts and feelings. The anger is generally focused on the behaviors of the adult child, but can also be focused on major influences in his or her life, particularly spouses and in-laws. Anger is important in the grief process because it generates the strength required to move forward in the grief process. Anger becomes a problem when it descends into the blaming process that keeps an estranged parent stuck and prevents them from taking responsibility for their own well-being. It also becomes a problem when it is directed at other parents who have positive relationships with their adult children. One of the most significant components in a prolonged grief disorder is bargaining. Bargaining is based on feelings of desperation and the thought that I will do anything to keep this relationship. This bargaining may be directed toward God, but more often results in a season of pleading by an estranged parent that may seem to work for a time or may be rejected at the outset. I'm not talking about editing one's thoughts for the sake of the relationship. It is one thing to not interfere in the way your child parents your grandchildren. It is another to witness a grandchild being abused and being instructed any action taken will be at the cost of the relationship. It is one thing to make amends for failures in a relationship. It is another thing to be repeatedly reminded of those failures to a point that is detrimental to your own well-being. This may also be a time when guilt feelings will become acute. Since no parent is perfect, it is typical during this period for the parent to become aware of their shortcomings. Bargaining is a particularly important aspect of the grief work for an estranged parent. It encourages them to grow in their self-awareness and to be more realistic about their strengths and shadows. Bargaining also helps parents explore multiple possibilities for reconciliation so that by the time they come to acceptance that they can do so without feeling that they simply quit. Bargaining becomes a problem if it negatively impacts the self-esteem of the parent, either through the abandonment of their own needs or excessively apologizing for failures that are never really forgiven. The next component in a prolonged grief disorder is depression. This depression is not a sign of mental illness, though it may have many of the same characteristics: withdrawal, sadness, and lack of energy or interest in things that once were sources of vitality. For estranged parents, feelings of depression are intensified by the fact that most parents they know have relationships with their adult children and grandchildren. Not only have they lost the relationship with their adult child, they have lost the ability to relate to their peers in an area of life that is very special to them. Depression also serves an important role in the grief process. It deters us from engaging in an endless bargaining process by sapping the energy required to sustain it. It also sets the stage for taking positive steps that will restore us to a vital, purposeful life when we find ourselves saying, I don't want to live this way for the rest of my life. The final component is acceptance. Acceptance enables us to make practical adjustments to the losses of estrangement. This can include developing relationships with other family members and friends, exploring the possibilities of surrogate children and grandchildren, and investing in hobbies or service opportunities. Acceptance also opens estranged parents to consider legal and financial issues that will need to be addressed, like powers of attorney, estate management, and final arrangements. This can feel like giving up hope. In reality, we are beginning to shift our focus on the hope that we will be reconciled to our adult child to a focus on the hope that we can reinvent ourselves to become vital and purposeful. This change in hope is important. Hope becomes a two-edged sword, inspiring at times positive optimism and a desire to keep fighting on. But if or when hopefulness becomes dashed, perhaps even deeper despair follows. If acceptance is not realized, this turmoil of contrasting emotions, endlessly oscillating between hope and despair, renders this kind of grieving particularly stressful and may prevent closure or finding mental peace. As mentioned at the beginning of the chapter, the process of working through grief is rarely this linear. Rather than thinking about stages of grief, it might be more accurate to think of aspects of grief that people experience in different ways and at different points of time. Even after someone has accepted the loss, they may cycle back through familiar questions. Is this really permanent? How could I have messed this up so badly? Maybe there is something more I can do? This is a natural part of the process. However, it can also be helpful to understand that there is a natural sequence to the grief process. For example, it will be impossible to deal with any other aspect of grief as long as a person is denying emotionally that a loss has occurred. We have been on a journey exploring why parental estrangement is so difficult. It is a multidimensional suffering that includes shunning, meaning deprivation, and prolonged grief disorder. These three forces interlock in a way that intensifies emotional distress and keeps estranged parents trapped in their pain. For many estranged parents, having a way to understand their pain is helpful in and of itself. As mentioned in an earlier chapter, sharing the experience of estrangement with others can provide even more relief and insight into the problem. However, for many others, a full recovery from the trauma of parental estrangement requires a reframing of our basic understanding of the parent-adult-child relationship. Anytime we have to rethink something as deeply ingrained and fundamental as parenting, we can be sure that some significant work will be required. The chapters that follow present some alternative ways of thinking about parental estrangement. Simply reading these chapters will be of some help, but the real benefit can only be realized by adopting the different ways of thinking that these pages describe. This may require a change of mind and a commitment to realign your behavior. I will be elaborating regarding those practical steps at the end of each chapter. Questions for reflection and discussion. Which of the following components of prolonged grief disorder are you dealing with now? Shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Rank the following factors from most painful to least: shunning, deprivation of meaning, prolonged grief disorder. How open do you feel right now to changing some of your thinking about parenting? If you are using this book in a group discussion, what did you gain from hearing others speak and from speaking? This is the end of Chapter 6. Thank you for joining us. If you feel like this was helpful and may help others, please click the like button and share the link for this with others. You can also help by subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell that will notify you whenever a new video has been uploaded. And as always, please feel free to comment below on anything from this chapter or from the book that you may have questions about or you may find helpful for other people. Thank you.